Mansfield.
Sometimes my wife asks me to do some... Hang on a minute. There we go. You can argue the toss about the style in this particular graphical coat of paint, but sometimes remasters are just better. As I was saying, sometimes my wife asks me to do something, and I reply, I'm on it. She has no idea. No idea this reflexive response comes from a place of death, destruction, war. The front lines of 1995's most devastating conflict, one of which I was a part and still feel the effects of to this day.
I'm on it.
Yeah, obviously I'm talking about Command & Conquer. Also, I played it first on PlayStation, so 1997, not 1995, because that's when it came out on Sony's machine, and I did the whole return Blast Chamber to Blockbuster because it was terrible and exchange it for CNC on PS1 because I like the look of the cover. Hold on. 1995 is 30 years ago? Well, this just turned into an anniversary thing, didn't it? Fun how that works out sometimes. Let's talk about one of the best games ever made. At the time at least, shall we? Nope, not the first. Not the first real-time strategy game. That was... not even developer Westwood Studios' first RTS. That was Dune 2, which wasn't even Westwood's first RTS, as it made Battletech the Crescent Hawk's Revenge a few years prior to Dune 2 under the Westwood Associates moniker. But Command & Conquer was the game that set the standard, raised the bar, ion-cannoned expectations. It was the game Westwood wanted to make, freed from the shackles of any somewhat limiting license, a world entirely of the studio's own creation, in which they could draw from events happening in our human reality, the First Gulf War, and apply it to a setting and narrative that didn't have to feature spice and big-ass sandworms and whatever the hell is in Battletech. Robots, I guess. Having to collect spice to fund your war effort was a good mechanic, so Westwood didn't have to bin everything that had come before. Maybe just tweak it so it's an extraterrestrial inorganic material that grows like weeds in my garden when I make the mistake of turning my back on them for 3 seconds. Yeah, it was a fresh start, but Command & Conquer certainly saw Westwood building on what the team had put together previously. The basics remained with, well, what worked. Rival armies attempting to wipe one another out on a map. Sometimes with a set number of units apiece, more often with the need to build up a base and the units you'd then use to gun-thwack your opponent into bloody submission. You'd set up, you'd gather resources in the form of Tiberium, the aforementioned space not quite plant, you'd build your fortress of turtletude, and you'd eventually tank rush the cretinous AI as long as it hadn't already picked away at your production structures without you noticing. Oh, and as things progressed, you'd unlock ever better technology with which to cudgel your opponent. They were the basic elements, established basics, well-honed basics. Basics that honestly would have been enough to carry CNC as another solid RTS from Westwood. But it was atop the foundations built by those basics that the developers added the flourishes and unique character that really made the game stand out, that made it something so much more memorable than it otherwise would have been. Who you actually controlled played a big part in these flourishes. Either GDI, the Global Defense Initiative, ostensibly the good guys, or the Brotherhood of Nod, the cultish baddies. Each side had plenty of palette swapping going on with a lot of basic buildings and units, but each additionally had more than enough uniqueness to make playing as one or the other a markedly different experience. Your UN NATO stand-ins from GDI were backed by significant funding from nations around the world and so gave players access to stronger basic units, like tanks and APCs, as well as, eventually, the overwhelming power of the Mammoth tank and the space-based surgical strike ability of the ion cannon. About as subtle as any modern well-funded military then. Nod meanwhile acted as the less outwardly powerful but no less lethal alternative to GDI's world police. The narrative framing it as the Brotherhood not having as much cash to hand in order to engage in some good old government-approved R&D meant regular units relied more on speed and guerrilla strike tactics than the ability to engage in stand-up fights. What this would lead to with Nod was the subtlety of stealth tanks, the strong base defense of the laser-blasting obelisks of light, and, well, yeah, there's the whole terrorists thing too, meaning Nod would also pump out terrifying weapons like flame tanks, exactly what they sound like, and ultimately would use the least quiet and subtle of all the attacks as its superweapon, a nuclear missile. Stealthy. These differences, as I said, added a good deal of character to Command & Conquer, as well as having the obvious effect of mixing things up and stopping it from getting dull when you played as one side or the other. Shout out to engineers, mind, whose ability to capture enemy structures meant you could have a game where GDI was nuking the map, or Nod was pumping out sweet grey-blue mammoth tanks. Always found that element of the game a joy. Core mechanics honed by a studio that had RTS chops joined a new and fresh approach to the established genre norms. New units, a new setting, a distinctly modern and near-future real feel to things. Command & Conquer wasn't brand new, but it was such a step up from what had come before, it couldn't feel like anything other than a bold, fresh experience. It had edge. It felt mature in the way we all wanted games to feel when we were teenagers in the 90s. It felt modern, and caveating this by pointing out I mean in the mid-90s because time has happened and expectations have changed, it played like a dream. So what else did Westwood need to do? Well, it needed to couch everything neatly in a narrative structure that lifted the whole thing to legendary status and helped to ensure this one game would become a long-lasting series that ended up having Ric Flair and Tim Curry in it. Obviously. It isn't like this is a point nobody ever makes, but hey, it is one that's still worth making. Command & Conquer likely wouldn't have wedged itself so firmly in the brain pans of so many players for so many years were it not for how it presented itself. It's that character and uniqueness, and nerve and talent I mentioned previously. The series as a whole went off in a few different directions in the years that followed 1995, but it was the original CNC that, intentionally or not, set the tone that drew players in. First and foremost thanks to its full motion video sequences. I wouldn't say the first game was cheesy by design, I would say it was aware of its cheese, but unable to avoid said cheese owing to the selection of both inexperienced actors and literal members of the dev team filling roles in the game's many FMVs. The general cheapness of that particular style of cutscene, and the limited budgets, both of time and money, Westwood was working with to put said FMVs together. Still, Command & Conquer was riddled with cheese. And it was glorious. From the opening montage of CNC's alternate reality television, through the dozens of mission briefings from your superiors, and onto the additional events like the, dare I say it, fake news coverage of an alleged GDI massacre of civilians, the game put its story out there, put its world front and center, and put its would-be actors on the spot to provide some pretty heavy lifting of those narrative beats. The folks in the FMVs weren't all would-be actors, of course. Some had other jobs in TV and movies before Command & Conquer. Some even went on to have acting jobs after, miraculously. But it was the magnetic charisma of Joe Kukan, who knows if I'm pronouncing that right, as Brotherhood of Nod leader Kane, that went down in gaming legend as one of the vanishingly few examples of an actual good performer lifting the whole experience of a game. You actually sort of wanted to do good by the big bad boy, despite the fact he was chief of an international terrorist syndicate hell-bent on destruction of the prevailing order, and with a distinctly religious cult tint on the whole thing. Why? Dunno. Smile, maybe? As the Tiberian storyline continued all the way through to Command & Conquer 4, which, yes, I forgot existed, it veered wildly away from the original, surprisingly grounded narrative constructed in the first game. And, honestly, it remained glorious. Lovely sci-fi schlock, ever-increasing stakes in play, and our big-OT'd immortal anti-hero essentially deified. It really raised things far and away beyond what you might have expected from the little 1995 game that could. All the same, our first involvement with Kane was still bewitching. Even without the interdimensional aliens and talk of ascension, Nod's Messiah in the flesh brought a genuine weight of fanaticism to Command & Conquer. It lifted the hokey narrative, not out of hokeyism to be clear, but out of banality. Kane is sold as legend before you even meet him in the Nod campaign. His initial entrance is burned into my memory because Seth is a Burke and deserved it. Kane's impact on the GDI campaign, while understandably dulled, still managed to keep him at the fore throughout. You never really expected it from cheap FMV sequences in mid-90s real-time strategy titles, that the game's nemesis, or your boss if you slap the Nod disc in, would be so appealing. Charisma and arrogance is a hell of a drug, it seems. So without those FMVs, and especially without Kukan as Kane, 1995 CNC wouldn't have made as much of an impact. That was proven out through the sequels, which maintained a focus on FMV sequences, featuring real people doing real acting and, in fact, moving up to include genuine, real, proper good actors, despite the fact the industry as a whole had moved on to in-engine or pre-rendered cutscenes a la Half-Life or Metal Gear Solid. But it had been set as a defining aspect of Command & Conquer, and it's one that still brings great joy to my withered old mind. Not to keep coming back to it or anything, but I really do like Seth getting shot in the head like that. Guy's a prick. Less important in my eyes, but still also pretty important in my ears, was CNC's audio presentation. Sound effects that, well, I opened the video talking about it. I repeat lines from this game in the real world. They might not have been key to setting the series' tone or making CNC stand out from the crowd, but they were definitely a big part of the game, of establishing its tone and characters. Equally the music, 90s tech war rock, let's call it, though no, not that, because it's not Tech War by William Shatner. Whatever the pigeonhole for Command & Conquer's ditty little tunes, they were another route by which you get something from the game indelibly burned into your psyche for the rest of time. And so on. The audio, the music, the graphics, the vibe. Sure, without a good game backing it all up, you've got nothing of real note, but Command & Conquer had the good game, plus all of those additional bits and pieces to lift it, to mark it as something standout, to push it into the realms of genuinely cool or acceptably cheesy. We all want to run around screeching that the game itself is what matters, but does anyone honestly think CNC would have had as much of an impact as it did without the whole presentation of the thing coming together as it did? Without the music, you have bland, generic backing tracks. Without the voice lines, you have lifeless on-screen units. Without the graphical style, you have something that still looks as clunky as Dune 2. Without the FMVs selling the story, you'd have a bunch of semi-sci-fi hokum about one bunch of tanks shooting at another bunch of tanks for some reason, offering up no real temptation, conjuring no desire to see in what direction the narrative would head. Fortunately, Command & Conquer was the full package. Great game, standout presentation. It turned heads, selling crap loads of copies on PC, and eventually pushing the game to head in some rather unexpected directions. Sega's Saturn, Sony's PlayStation, and Nintendo's 64. Had Command & Conquer only ever released on PC, the timeline would be fine. Nobody would have lost any sleep. It was a profoundly PC-ish game in a distinctly PC-friendly genre, and ultimately any of the success the series did see on console formats was minor and secondary compared to that achieved on those their home computers. Still, nice to talk about ports, isn't it? Especially when CNC received good? I'm going with good ports on the three main consoles of the day. A base Saturn port, a PlayStation version itself ported from the Saturn port, and a whole other N64 port with some interesting trimmings of its own. Sure, none of these versions were as good as the DOS or Windows versions, but they were examples of the sort of game that just shouldn't work on a controller and telly, being molded, beaten, and forced into doing just that. Working. Rough edges, warts and all, pick your idiom. They were far from perfect, but they were more than good enough. The Saturn version arrived first and set the bar, lower resolution, slower speed, clunky controls owing to a lack of mouse. And yet, it worked. Some getting used to, sure, but it worked. It was what a good port should be. The core of the original game battered and bent into the shape it needed to be in order to perform in its new home. Speedily speeding away from that first port, the original PlayStation bagged its version in 1997, from what I've gathered based on the Saturn port, but with a few differences. Some stuff nobody with a personality actually cares about, and other more meaningful stuff like exclusive missions for the PSX. Other than that, same again port-wise. This was where I encountered Command & Conquer in the wild though. The PlayStation version was one of the few games I bought, not rented, from Blockbuster, lured in as I was by the goggly man's face and the promise of some commanding. Maybe some conquering. Had I heard of the game before? Probably. I didn't have a PC in 97, but I was a voracious consumer of video game magazines, so there's every chance the purchase was in part down to knowing the game's reputation. It's all moot though. Fact is, this was the first for me, and it was an utter delight, an awakening of sorts, pushing me into a world of RTSs I'd never really considered before, at least not outside of the brief foray into Dune 2 I had on the Amiga. CNC had it all, long-winded cerebral face-offs, things exploding a lot, just Seth. new construction options, silos needed. Ah, man. What a game. What a port. What a lovely time to exist, even if wrestling a controller as the missions got harder and harder was an exercise in futility, and I am eternally scarred from using the commando owing to his inability to look after himself without you, the player, engaging in quick responsive inputs to direct him to shoot at the soldiers emerging from the structure he just blew up. It needed mouse control, is what I'm saying. Good as the PlayStation version was, I only ever have a go at it for the nostalgia these days. CNC, the first game, the middle one, the last in the series, they're all at home on the PC. Even if the Saturn and PlayStation did get entirely serviceable ports that, in one format's case at least, did lead to more of the series making non-PC appearances. And then, there was the outlier. The N64 version, itself ported by a bunch of nobodies who had never and would never make anything of any significance. Except for System Shock, both OG and 2, Thief, OG and 2, and so on and so forth. It was Looking Glass Studios for some reason. But yeah, Ninty's version certainly had that look to it. The console's hardware handling sprites of a sort in such a particular way necessitated going back to the drawing spriting board, resulting in something that at the time looked cool. It's Command & Conquer, but 3D. But in reality was a clunky and resolutely ugly way of showcasing the game. The actual game was good, it being of a similar vein to the PS1 and Saturn versions, a slightly cut down but otherwise straight port of the original. Some different covert ops, some tweaks to missions to account for a clumsy but functional control scheme, and the desire to stay completely away from the expansion pack powered high-res graphics mode because we like our frame rates measured per second, not per heat death of the universe. Is that hyperbolic enough? I never know. All in, though, the consoles were home to, or better, felt like home for, CNC in a way you probably wouldn't have expected. It's not like the RTS genre ever really took a hold in non-PC worlds, and plenty of other games in the same genre did struggle to translate. Old Conky got it right, though, and paved the way for plenty of us nerds to get hooked on turtling and tank rushes at an early age. Even if we would have to drag our sorry carcasses over to personal computers, in the most part, to keep up to date with the best of the genre. Said genre way too many times there. Command & Conquer was a huge success, sold boatloads, made a ton of cash, and landed on countless best-of lists in the year it launched and in the decades that followed. So yes, more happened. 1996 had us all on Red Alert because Command & Conquer Red Alert came out. The first of the alternate history franchise franchise, it offered a new setting and units along with countless quality of life updates and fixes that started moving the series into a more recognisably modern one. Not that the original wasn't modern when it came out, it's just that going back to it these days there are so many stupid little things in the first game that they fixed in Red Alert, so it feels like a big difference. Just let me place my walls further away, you goons! And Red Alert made it over to the PlayStation, as well as the expansion pack The Aftermath, both notable for introducing mouse control and link-up play. Link-up play? What that be then there? I hear you crow. Well, my little goober, link-up play was something some consoles did in the past to allow multiplayer when one console just couldn't cut it. 2 PlayStations, 2 TVs, 2 copies of the game, one in Red Alert's case as it came with 2 discs and either could be used to play, and a cable to entwiddle each console to the other. Technical term. It was magnificent. It's a topic I'll probably do a video focused on in future. It was niche as all heck, and it set me up for a lifetime of never playing Command & Conquer online, because if a friend from my school could beat me so easily every time, what hope did I have in the worldwide open world of the World Wide Web? I digress. The CNC series continued. The Tiberian storyline was a surprisingly compelling one in a cheesy way. Red Alert went full panto, and I, like all right-thinking people, am obsessed. Generals existed. Some other stuff, but that's all for other videos, I'd say. The basic, pared-back look at Command & Conquer's legacy goes something like this. It was bar-raisingly brilliant. It continued to innovate and excel. EA sunk its teeth in a bit deeper. Sequels continued rolling out. Innovation felt increasingly stale and the focus of players had wandered off to other genres. EA'd the series. Kaboom? Kaboom! But back when it all started, it was quite something to behold. Command & Conquer wasn't the first. Not for RTSs, not for Westwood, not for anything. But it was the first that made such a huge, lasting impact on so many of us around the world for just how well it handled itself. And the world of strategy in real time, no less, it introduced plenty of us too. I don't quote any other RTS series, put it that way. Yeah?
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for watching, and thanks to my patrons on Patreon, who I do hope one day will deify me like Cain himself, and who I would never point my obelisk at. Join my personhood of brands, that's Patreon, at the link below or at the end of the video. I'm off to find my mate I used to play Link Up Red Alert with, see if he fancies a rematch. He might have even more of an upper hand given he's been in the actual military for decades now, though. But I'm on it.
I'm on it.